Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm here again with another interview of autoheterophiles with an autogynephilic individual named Christopher. And yeah, he's just watched some of my episodes I've put out and wanted to add his story to the collection, and I'm glad he's doing that. So thank you for coming on the channel, Christopher.
And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's we're gonna get a whole bunch of these out there. So thanks for helping. Um, I was curious, what sort of how did you come upon my work or my channel?
So I actually came about it in I came to your work in a kind of roundabout way that I don't think most people do. I think a lot of people see your podcast interviews somewhere and then they read your book or your blog or whatever. Um I actually started off after I'd read Anne Lawrence's book. I just went into the Kindle store and typed in autogynephilia, and your book had literally it either just came out or was just about to come out, and I had never heard of you before. So I just decided to buy it because I was buying all the things on autogynephilia, trying to figure out what was going on with me.
Yeah, and it seems like with between Anne Lawrence's book and mine, that's probably a pretty good head start in terms of figuring it out.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So when you first, like, how did you first realize, like, you said you were looking for books on autogynephilia, so I'm curious, like, what spurred you to look for those and how you came across the concept.
Yeah. Maybe I don't know if it'd be best to go about this all chronologically, but anyways, I had encountered the concept of autogynephilia a couple years ago because I've had these sort of gender feelings since around the age of like 11 to 12 ish, and when I was reading about this stuff online, the gender theory stuff was always kind of like intuitively didn't make any sense to me. The sort of TRA
Right, yeah,
ideology.
same. I was
Um,
confused by it too.
and so I came across the word autogynephilia, and I was like, wow, this definitely describes me. But I didn't really look into the sexology, which I think a lot of people basically do that. They see the word, they see the basic definition, and they're like, okay, yeah. And then they stop, whether they're themselves autogynephilic or if they're, I don't know, gender critical feminists or whatever, trying to write polemics about autogynephilia. A lot of them don't really address the sexology. I didn't really look into it too deeply, and I was being raised evangelical Christian. I had the sort of, I feel like, commonplace prejudice among sort of conservative Christian types that all abnormal forms of sexuality are sort of I guess like infinitely malleable. Like you could just sort of get over it if you try hard enough. So I kind
So
of
you tried?
yeah, I tried that for a while. It didn't
Yeah.
go very well. There was a lot of shame and self hatred about that. Only
Yeah,
later
and
did I come back around to actually reading the sexology when the sort of dysphoria elements of it uh, came a little bit, became a little stronger when I hit about 20.
yeah, and how did the has learning about autogynephilia and sort of how it works impacted your dysphoria?
Um, it's actually allowed me to address it in a more rational manner, I think, on the whole. Like, like I said, I found the gender ideology stuff just kind of stupid from the get go, and so I never entertained any notions that I could actually be a woman or anything. Um, I sorry, give me a second. Realized that this was whether I like it or not, and it's probably not going to go away anytime soon. So I have to figure out what way to address it.
Right. So it sort of helped you like did it help you stop repressing or stop fighting with yourself
Yeah,
about it?
it helped. Well, it helped me to stop repressing insofar as I was like, okay, repression just looks like it'll be dysfunctional, and it's going to make my life worse. And I very recently had a bit of a deconversion from Eastern Orthodox Christianity. That's a bit of an off-topic thing, but um, a lot of my issues with gender dysphoria and trying to repress it stemmed kind of from that. And so now that I don't really have those kind of background religious reasons to suppress it, and I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. And it seems like it's just kind of part of who I am. I have to figure out what's the best way of approaching it.
Yeah, this is very rational. I like it. Did it
Well, thank
you
you.
said that some
That's what I'm aiming
yeah.
at.
You said that some of your dysphoria was related to the Christian beliefs. Like did are you referring to maybe like shame or
Yeah,
other
I don't
yeah?
think I said that. Yeah, I don't think I said dysphoria was directly related to my beliefs, but it was just that I had this dysphoria and I didn't really know what to do with it. And all of the answers that I would get are either something along the lines of, this is a sin issue, or you should just pray about it. Other people have like sins of lust, so you can get over them too. And that, like, obviously doesn't address the problem that, like, if you're a young man who's like normal and heterosexual, like you can hold back on your attraction to women knowing that at some point that will be fulfilled. It's a
Right.
little different saying you have this weird desire to be a woman. You can never act out on literally any of that, and you just kind of have to deal with that for the rest of your life.
Right. It
So
doesn't
in
give
that
you like
regard, there
any
was a lot
room
of,
to yeah, it's kind of like that doesn't give you
yeah,
any room to like decide what you want to do.
yeah, and there was a lot of sort of deep rooted shame about, like, because while some people that I talked to about this in the past kind of seemed to imply at me that this had to have been caused by some kind of abuse or something. I literally like don't have that experience. It doesn't line up at all. Um, sorry, I'm forgetting the sentence I was saying halfway through saying it.
That
Anyways,
happens to me
okay. There's
quite
an
often.
yeah. There's an insistence that had to, like, that had to come from abuse or whatever, and I knew that that wasn't true, and so there was a lot of like internalized self hatred because I was like, why why is it that I was created like this in this sort of disgusting fashion where I want to be something that I can never be, and that desire is fundamentally wrong for me to fulfill, and there's nothing I can do about it. So yeah, that a lot of that is sort of cleared up over time as I've sort of come to terms with the fact that this is a more like, it's a permanent condition. It's just something that happens. And um, that I guess there's ways of engaging with it rationally, because I tried to convince myself for a very long time that gender ideology and like transition were like sort of identical constructs. Like if you went down that route in any way whatsoever, you were implicitly like giving up your reason.
Right. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I tried to do that as a bit of like a psychological mechanism to get me to stop being tempted that way, but it doesn't actually work.
Right. Yeah, like that's the frustrating thing. Like since it comes from an orientation, it's hard to use logic to stop it.
Yeah.
Um, how have you been now that you've been conceiving of it in a new way, and you do have some temptation to transition? How are you exploring that side of yourself?
So there was a Benjamin Boyce interview a couple of months ago with a self-aware autogynephilic transsexual named Skylar.
Oh yeah,
I Yeah, I really loved that interview. I actually I
yeah,
messaged
she's
her
great.
like probably yeah, I messaged her probably the day afterward, and we ended up having a couple of like lengthy video conversations. Um, just like comparing our experiences and stuff. And I actually felt like she both like she had a lot of experiences in her description of I guess dysphoria that were pretty similar to mine, and her approach to transition, which seemed to be sort of like gathering data, taking things incrementally, um, occasional sort of furtive cross dressing to see how um, she felt in the sort of social experience of being perceived as female. So that's kind of the approach I'm taking. I've been asking a lot of people in DMs basically their experiences with AGP, both transitioners and non-transitioners, um, and just trying to compare our experiences along with just kind of like occasionally experimenting, going out to like LGBT spaces, cross-dressed, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Do you live in a progressive area?
I'm in Southern California, so it's like kind of it's kind of a conservative-y pocket of Southern California. So I'm like not far from progressive areas, but I don't live in one.
Right. Okay. So yeah, it makes sense why you'd go specifically to the LGBT places
Yeah,
to dabble in it then. How have
yeah.
those experiences been?
Um, they've been. It's been a bit of a well. Okay, on the whole, they've been pretty good. A little bit boring, honestly, because the first two times I went on, I've only really gone three times in earnest. There was one time that I went out and just like stopped and got nervous and then didn't get out of the truck and went home. But the times that I actually did go out and sort of courageously went in there, the two times were kind of boring because they were like on Sundays and it was a slow crowd, but it was still like
Yeah.
nice. Um, the third time it was on Saturday. I actually I post a thread about it every time it happens, just because like it usually was a slow evening, and posting about it kind of eased the loneliness of it, I guess, or also just allowed me to like think about my experiences and write them down somewhere. um,
Right, yeah, like taking
last
notes.
night, yeah, last night was the third time actually, and that started off really well, but things got a little bit weird near the end. But that's just like that's not really related to anything. That was just kind of like a bad experience.
Yeah. Um, do you think you're gonna keep trying that, like, going out to bars? Are you dressed while
E-
doing this?
like while doing the interview,
No,
or
no, no,
or
well,
you're just saying no, okay, or you're just saying,
like,
well,
at the
that
bars.
or am I just gonna keep doing? Yeah, sorry, the way you phrased it sounded like two questions, so I was kind of confused. But anyways, yeah, I'm probably gonna keep experimenting in that vein. Um, there's also a very like progressive LGBT friendly cafe in my area that has a lot of late night events, and it seems like that place is a little more suited to my temperament than bars. I'm not very much of a like a nightclub kind of guy. I'm very like introverted, bookish sort.
Yeah. I don't really like bars either. Um, just the drug of choice there, I don't think people are at their best on alcohol. compared to other drugs.
Yeah.
Um, so like, when did you? How old were you when you first started? Like either having like the desire to be a woman or notice like any signs of what you now understand to be autogynephilia.
Yeah. So the earliest experience that I recall was I was maybe about 10, so it was like fairly early puberty. I wasn't having any kind of like explicitly sexual feelings at that point, but I remember and this is okay. So I was watching an episode of The Fairly Odd Parents. I watched that show a lot as a kid. Um
Was this the
I
the
feel
gender
like
switch episode with Cosmo?
this is that is absolutely correct. This is I'm trying to remember the name of the episode. The Boy Who Would Be Queen, I think. For the
Oh, they
longest time
named
I
it after
actually thought
Bailey's book? That's funny.
I I used to think that, but then it turns out that
Yeah.
the episode is like a year earlier than the book, so I'm just confused on the naming.
Oh, wow, okay, that was a good coincidence then.
Yeah. Yeah, for a while though, I was totally once I started studying the whole autogynephilia thing, I was like, why on earth did they name an episode of a children's show after a sexology book? But
Right,
no,
yeah.
it didn't turn out that way. But yeah, I remember like I was watching that episode and I was very like I don't really know how else to say it other than I was really sort of enticed by it, and it made me very curious about what it was like to be a girl, and that sort of recurring thought would sort of continue to come to me. Um, like it never really left me completely, I guess.
Right, but
It
that
was
was
it
what
became a kind of
first, like
obsession.
yeah, like, that was the first, like, trigger that sorta, like, brought the thought to the forefront, and then, like, it never fully left.
Yeah, that's the earliest trigger that I recall. Um, a couple years later, when I was maybe about 12, my parents got me my first iPod Touch. Um, all the other kids were getting iPhones, but I was really happy with my iPod. I got to play like Angry Birds and stuff. But uh, whether they liked it or not, that kind of meant that I had de facto unlimited, unsupervised access to the internet. And so I distinctly remember Googling as a kid, can a boy become a girl? How can a boy become a girl? And that led me to discover that led me to discover like TG stories and captions and animations, along with like MTF transition videos. And
Yeah.
yeah, and you know, at that point I was 12. Things were Puberty was hitting hard, things were getting like more overtly sexual, and that was like literally the only erotic stimulus that appealed to me at all.
Right, so you, like you didn't even have, like, a phase with, like, just looking at normal like, porn in a normal way of being like, "Wow, that woman is really attractive." It, like, started with
Yeah.
the transformation and gender stuff.
Yeah, it started with the gender stuff, and later on I did end up like running into sort of like normal porn and didn't find it interesting at all and felt like it was kind of gross.
Right, like, almost like, "Oh, man, they're not being very nice to her," or like, this
Yeah, yeah, there's
yeah,
something
it's
of
kinda
like degrading women in it that like puts me off inherently. And that's there in some of the TG stuff also, but like and that element's always kind of put me off a little, but yeah.
yeah. No, I get it. Like, the sort of, like it's kind of like a respect or admiration of women where it's like you don't wanna see them disrespected.
Yeah. Um I think in particular Anne Lawrence had a little section where she quoted Freud talking about how men's admiration of women is in some in some sense fundamentally opposed to their attraction to women. And I kind of like I kind of feel that I feel like I've I actually didn't have allosexual attraction to women for a pretty long time, at least I think in comparison to a lot of AGPs. I didn't really feel that until I was like maybe 19ish. But I feel like I've always had a hard time sort of being attracted to women, or sort of like admitting that I'm attracted to women, because I always felt like that was fundamentally like off or wrong in some way.
Right. And how did you start noticing that you were attracted to women?
I had I had a really powerful experience when I was 19 of I was talking to this really beautiful girl. She's still kind of a friend of mine. Though a lot of my friendships have been kind of let's say altered by my leaving the church. But anyways, let's call her Christine. Christine and I were out in front of the church, and we were just talking. And I don't even remember what we were talking about, but it was like relatively late in the evening. It was sunset. The sky was relatively beautiful, and we were the only two people out there still. Everyone else had sort of meandered off after Vespers. And I remember like looking at her and noticing she's a very like I think she's like a very sort of idealistically feminine woman. Like she's um sweet, polite, a very very good listener. And I noticed like just how intently she was listening to me talking, I guess, and I found her really really beautiful. And I just wanted to draw near to her and like kiss her. And I literally had never thought that about anybody at all prior. Like I knew I was supposed to think that, but I never like
Right.
felt that in a deep way. I obviously didn't do any of that because I was like, no, I'm this disgusting weird pervert that can't date people, so I'm not going to do that to her. But yeah, I had that experience, and there was another girl that I had a pretty significant crush on. Both of them are now married to other people, which is good for them.
Yeah. And did how did leaving the church impact your gender stuff?
It basically gave me the freedom to explore it, because as long as I was convinced that Christianity, like traditional Christianity, was true, then any amount of, like, I don't know how much you know about Eastern Orthodoxy in comparison to other forms of Christianity, but the sort of like traditionalists, they take a very, very traditionalist view of gender. And so there isn't even really room for exploration around the edges. Like, among certain communities, shaving your beard is seen as an effeminate behavior that men ought not engage in. So
Right. Yeah.
there's a
And
certain
you
level
need a
of
little more
like,
wiggle room than
I
that.
can't, yeah, so I literally just I couldn't explore that. But as long as I was convinced that it was true, then I was just going to say, well, to hell with my feelings. This stuff is all sin. I don't want to engage in it. Um, I came to eventually disbelieve that it was true, and it took me a little while to sort of make sure and cover my tracks and figure out whether it was just an emotional rejection, or like I'd logically sort of gotten out of that position. And once I was fairly convinced that I was actually being reasonable, then that allowed me to just sort of start experimenting and just not feel guilt and shame about it.
Yeah, that's good. It sounds like you had a pretty quick the way you're describing it, it sounds like a pretty quick like deconversion process and like adjusting to not being
Yeah,
part of
it's
the church anymore.
well, I'm having a hard time adjusting as regards like friend groups, just because like
Right. Like the
90% of
social
my friends were church
consequences.
friends. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's massively downhill. But intellectually, I think that I've been kind of moving in the direction that I've been moving for a while. Like I had a number of like problematics, I guess, with church doctrine uh that I wasn't sure how to resolve. But before my confidence just switched from I don't understand this, but it's probably true because the church teaches it. And if I believe part of their church teaching, I have to believe all of it. It was like a sort of a coherentist thing. And then I moved from that to, oh, the reason none of this makes sense is because it doesn't make sense and it's not true. So while there was definitely a lot of like emotional turmoil about it, I'd kind of resolved a lot of that earlier, I guess. Like this has been something that I've been kind of on the fence about for maybe a year.
Okay. So it sounds like it didn't even like necessarily start super early in terms of like um during adolescence or puberty.
What
Like
do you mean by the it?
the sort of but it, I mean like seeing flaws or things that don't make sense in the church doctrine or
Well,
your
well,
religious
actually,
belief.
so I was a convert to Eastern Orthodoxy. I was raised evangelical, so there was actually I did actually criticize a lot of things that I used to believe. It's just that I think I adopted a largely kind of coherentist epistemology that doesn't really make any sense, and came to sort of reject that in place of a more like foundational correspondence view of truth, I guess. It's a little bit
Yeah, it
of
sounds like
a
you've really looked into
heady
this because you're
abstract way
using
of doing that. Yeah.
well, yeah, I mean, since you're using the like appropriate technical terms, that I assume you kind of like went real deep on it, trying to figure out what is true and how do we find that out.
Yeah, I've always been kind of a philosophy nerd since like about middle school when like I don't even remember how I ran into them, but there was the like modern stoicism revival thing. And so I started reading Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, and it led me from there to the like larger Greek philosophical tradition, and then from there to like the broader Western philosophy uh, stuff. And yeah, I always thought it was sort of like more intuitive and more kind of basic than a lot of my Christian beliefs. I still thought that they could be reconciled, but I always leaned a little bit more towards reason than faith, as it were. Um, but yeah, stoicism was like a tool that I tried to use to get over the whole gender feels thing, and that didn't work very well. Also,
Right, yeah. It's I mean, but of the things to pick, that's a pretty I s- stoicism seems like a pretty decent worldview or like set of methods.
yeah, I still I've moved away from them in a lot of ways, but I still maintain I think their most basic orientation towards the world, which is that the world is such as it is, and you're going to have to adapt yourself to that if you want to live a remotely tranquil or decent life. And so you're just gonna have to do what you have to do in order to make that work, and you have to just accept the truth of how things are.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Um
Yeah,
w- what age are you around what age are you now?
I'm
Like
23. I'm gonna be 24 in January.
okay, still a youngin. Um
Yeah,
yeah, how do you like how do you foresee like from what you said it sounds like you're in the early stages of exploring like where you want to go with like how to express autogynephilia like and to what extent like what do you like if you were to guess what your trajectory is going to be, what do you expect?
So okay, so I'm trying to remain as open as possible right now to the range of solutions. But if you were to ask me, as you just did, to give a prediction, I think that I have more in common with a lot of the transitioners in terms of my dysphoria and my experience than a lot of the people who just engage in cross dressing or on like weekends or whatever. Um, because if you want to get into like the sort of subtypes, I
Yeah,
definitely
sure.
like of the categories. Anatomic dysphoria is the one that I feel the strongest about. Um,
Yeah.
and transvestic is like a little lower down the line. Um, so I guess what I'm trying to do is see to what degree I can resolve things via cross dressing and stuff, and also I'm testing out, and it's like queer spaces, so it's not exactly like a normal environment, but at the same time, I want to sort of investigate how it feels playing a woman's social role, and whether I would be able to sort of do that in a way that feels authentic.
Yeah. No, that's reasonable, especially to try it in the sort of the queer spaces. It's, it's kind of like doing it with training wheels. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah,
Um, so like what you indicate that you mostly have the anatomic aspect, um, or strongly do. What, um, you also mentioned having dysphoria. I'm curious, like, how does dysphoria manifest for you? Like, what sort of
yeah.
things might
I
trigger
was
it?
hoping to get into that actually, because I think a lot of like trans people on the internet use dysphoria in this really vague way that
Yeah.
doesn't like it can be used to describe anything and everything. Like, the reason I didn't have friends in college is because of dysphoria or something. It's like,
Right, or
no,
sometimes even used
actually,
to
you were just
describe
like,
positive feelings too.
yeah, yeah. So if I might express myself more precisely, um, there's definitely a bit of dysphoria and a bit of euphoria in all of this. The dysphoric elements are uh, mostly like the main thing has always been that like sort of compulsive thought and that like yearning to be female, and only recently has it manifested more in terms of like distinct fixation about like facial features or about the lack of breasts or yeah, so like the I think a lot of the particulars of dysphoria are fairly new. I didn't feel that until a couple of years ago, but the sort of more generic, like constant wondering what would this be like if I was a girl, how it seems like it would be preferable on the whole. Uh, that's been around for a lot longer.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
and it that sort of reminds me of, like, I can recall there's one case in Ellis's, Eonism that says, like, I think their name was RM. They said that, like, what started as like, they started by wondering what it would be like to be a girl, but that gradually became regret that they were not born a girl. Um, so yeah, it just what you said just reminded me of that. Like, what can start out as wondering about being a
yeah,
thing, eventually, like, as the condition develops, it can just be sort of like dissatisfaction or like despair at not being that thing.
yeah.
Um,
And I've always also So actually, this is another element. I don't know whether to chalk this up to dysphoria or to chalk this up to just being a fairly introverted, possibly autistic sort of person. In the sense that I've never felt like completely comfortable or at home in my body. Not in any kind of like depersonalization sense where like people, like I've talked to people who describe looking in the mirror and like not recognizing them as themselves. I don't know what that feels like. That's not my experience. It's just always like I can look masculine and, as far as I can tell, sort of attractively masculine, and it doesn't really do anything for me.
Right, like, it doesn't matter, right?
Oh,
Like,
sorry,
emotionally.
say again?
Oh, that, like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter when you see yourself as, like, handsome or whatever, like, it means nothing emotionally.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's yeah, so yeah, it's so yeah, just to summarize, you're kind of in the beginning phases of exploring gender stuff after finally giving yourself permission to, and it kinda seems like your trajectory might end up towards transsexualism, but you're not quite sure yet.
Yeah. I don't want to make any hasty decisions. And, well, in terms of my personal situation, I happen to live with my parents still. So that's not going to work out. If, like I'm not going to like start HRT or something while living with my under my parents' roof. And I haven't really talked to them about any of this stuff. It's something that I would move out first and then talk to them about it and move through those stages if I go through those stages.
Right? Because are they still Christian?
Yeah, and I'm actually not even out to a lot of. I'm not even out to my family. Is the fact that I don't really identify as a Christian anymore. Um,
Oh, did you just sort of, like,
yeah,
quietly fade away from it?
yeah, that's been my strategy so far. I've talked to sort of concerned friends because I've had like a number of people like call me because I haven't been showing up to church and they're my friends and they're wondering where I'm at. So I've talked to them about stuff. There's like two or three people who know about the gender stuff. Everyone else I've only talked about the sort of intellectual side of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing actually, one virtue actually of AGP as an explanation for transsexualism is that fairly open-minded, sort of like conservative sort of people who are going to immediately throw out the trans right, the trans right activists theory. Um, if if they're a little bit more open and willing to hear people's experiences, they're actually willing to hear a lot of the more detailed information about AGP. Because like while I was still actively Christian, I was very much in that kind of like intellectual apologetics framework, and I talked to a lot of friends about that kind of stuff. And so I was able to talk to them about my reading about all this gender stuff under the guise of I'm trying to understand what's going on with the trans thing, because if if Christianity is true, then you have to do something about it, right? Like it doesn't even matter
Right.
whether or not I felt that. So, um, anyways, my point is, the friends that I've talked to about it who are 100% not in support of me acting on autogynephilia are perfectly willing to understand it as a hypothesis and even understand some of the deeper elements of it, kind of knowing that I'm not like a creepy 30-year-old uh, like rapist person.
Yeah, I imagine as you, explore more of the secular world, it'll probably be a lot easier to find people to talk to about the gender stuff where they won't judge it at all.
Yeah, and I've had a few encounters like that. I met a couple of relatively polite gay fellows at the bar a few times, and I've had talks with them. But yeah,
Yeah. How oh, I've noticed um that in the past, like I've expressed the wish that more people would say like on Reddit when they see someone questioning their gender that they would like send the person DMs to let them know about like autogynephilia and stuff. And I think you've been doing that. I'm curious to know
yeah,
like, how that what sort of experiences you have doing that and how it goes.
yeah. So I've been doing it a little bit less lately, just because I've been hanging out more on Twitter and less on Reddit.
Yeah.
But yeah, Reddit's just kind of like annoying to be on in general. But sometimes the stuff on Ask AGP is useful or interesting, so I'll check it out every once in a while. And I'm guilty of scrolling down trans timelines like probably everybody else in this community. But anyways, so yeah, I've DM'd a couple people. Mostly I aim for people who are on the like Ask Transgender subreddit,
Yeah.
who are saying things like, I don't think that I'm trans, but I find myself aroused by this or that element, or I want to cross dress, but I don't think I'm a woman. What do I do? Like people who are very early in that stage of questioning, and they haven't gotten to the point where they've been sort of given that conceptual framework of gender ideology.
Right.
They're usually the easiest sorts of people to reach out to, and I usually just frame it as like, hey, I know what you're going through. I'm I'm doing the I have the exact same thing going on. This book, namely Autoheterosexual, I have a hard copy right here in the truck actually. I'll send them the link to the free version of the book and say, hey, look, this helped me out quite a bit. I don't know if it's, and I always kind of like, you know, put it forward humbly, like, I don't know if this describes your situation. Like, I'm not gonna just tell people, yeah, you're AGP. Here's the book.
Right. Yeah, that's a
Um,
good strategy what you're doing.
yeah, so I go at it a little bit with a little more humility and just say, hey, maybe this will help you, maybe it won't, but this helped me to figure out what was going on with me, and yeah, and so far the response has been 100% either positive or they just like didn't respond to me at all. I haven't gotten like, you know, horrible accusations or people blocking me or trying to get me banned from subreddits or something.
That
um
that's good.
yeah, I did actually not because of DMing people, but I did actually get banned this morning from Trans Adorable, because apparently they auto ban you if you comment on there and you're also part of the autogynephilia subreddit.
Yeah, yeah, there's there's definitely yeah, some of the trans subs have that automatically where if you post an Ask AGP or something, they'll just automatically ban you preventatively.
Yeah, I sent them. I basically sent the mods a message saying, "Yeah, okay, I believe AGP is real. I don't believe that everyone has it. I don't believe AGPs are fake trans. You know, like, and I haven't been like evangelizing to the masses in the comments on r/trans adorable. So like, could I get unbanned, please?" They haven't responded to me yet, but I'm interested to see how that kind of discussion goes. Probably
Yeah,
nowhere.
I probably know where, yeah, because Reddit mods are pretty unforgiving. And honestly, um, having done some modding now that I'm like a mod on various subreddits, it I find it kind of to be a hassle, so I don't even want to think about it. So
Yeah,
like if yeah, if I if I ban someone, it's like I don't want to have to reconsider that I did that. I just want it to be done with.
Yeah,
But
fair enough. I can see that. Yeah, I actually managed. I got banned for a little bit on r/MTF for saying that maybe, just maybe, trans women probably shouldn't go topless in public, and that probably hurts trans acceptance. And yeah,
that
I got a permanent ban, and I was able to just sort of negotiate that down to a 2-week ban by saying like, okay, I acknowledge that your rules do say that it's a safe space, so it's technically not a place for debate. But I'm not like relenting my opinion on that. I think that it's still dumb, and they're like, yeah, okay, whatever. Thanks for apologizing, I guess. And then they just reduced the ban.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's a reasonable comment to make. I mean, in terms of like trying to preserve, like trying to help transsexuals as a group to not incur backlash from society.
Yeah, and that's part of why I find Reddit just so incredibly exhausting is that Reddit trans communities have like functionally no sense of self-preservation because they're just all in on the ideology.
Yeah.
Like if you believe that you're actually a woman, then you're going to do weird sexual things that have to do with autogynephilia, and they're just going to be classed in your mind as normal woman stuff, so it's fine. But not ever, like literally nobody else in society sees it that way because it's not that way.
Yeah, it's interesting with the mainstream trans subreddits how you sort of like anything if you do anything that's sort of like not desirable to someone that has autogynephilic psychology, like basically if you do anything that suggests that you can't like change sex or that they should limit their gender expression in any way, like it's you get tremendous pushback.
Yeah, like I mean, you get people who get like sort of struggle sessions for not putting a space between trans and woman,
Right. Which
even though that was like common usage not that long ago.
yeah, but I mean, I get why they want that space because it makes a big difference ontologically, but
Yeah,
it's also it's so silly to fight over that little stuff. But yeah, it sounds like yeah, I'm glad that you haven't gotten banned from Reddit yet for DMing people and letting them know about
yeah,
autogynephilia. Because like I was doing that for a while, and I did it to message several dozen people that were clearly questioning and obviously autogynephilic. And eventually, one of them reported me, and I got like some sort of mark against my account on like a site wide basis. And I was like, now that I'm a mod of all these different things, I don't want to be risking that
yeah. You don't want to
the
get banned at this
subreddits
point.
anymore.
Yeah,
So I'm glad that you've um, taken to doing that whenever you run into them because I feel like that's the only way to reach some of these people on Reddit because, like you said, the ideology is so strong there, and
yeah,
if you can reach people while they're not committed to the ideology or committed to transitioning when they're still in the early phases of the questioning process, they're still open to it. But it's like after that, if they pass that point, then it's you kind of can't reach people anymore.
yeah. It's a very polarized environment. Also, I don't know to what degree you did this when you were DMing people, but I also I failed to mention and should have mentioned that I actually intentionally avoided the use of the word autogynephilia when initially messaging people. Like I would use the sort of autoheterosexual terminology that you came up with, along with linking specifically only your book, unless there was some indicator that they already knew about autogynephilia.
Right.
I guess. Yeah. I mean, I should
That
say
makes
knew about
sense.
autogynephilia and were like sort of okay with it as an explanation.
Yeah, that's a good strategy just in the sense that the word autogynephilia has been obviously positioned as a transphobic term, and so many people will have already been alerted to that, and so they'd be suspicious of anyone suggesting they would have it.
Yeah, which is ironic and shows that they do the sort of like meme thing where nobody actually reads Blanchard or the other sexologists because like literally none of them are dogmatically against transition.
Right, and Blanchard even he published an article in defense of transition for both types, and yeah, and in his papers, it'll say that, like, neither type is more like, both types can benefit from transition,
Yeah,
properly screened patients of both types. Obviously, he had more stringent standards than are now, um, in use in the modern society, but
yeah,
yeah, still basically there's no true trans, there's just 2 trans, so to speak.
yeah.
Um,
That's the frame that I've sort of adopted that there aren't any fake trans because there aren't any true trans. Like there are people with gender dysphoria for different reasons that resolve it by different means, and transition is a means that helps some people.
yeah, that's very rational. Yeah, I like it. Um, yeah, have you ever, do you have any, like, romantic history of dating women or anything?
So no, I didn't. I've literally dated nobody, and earlier on that was because I didn't even really feel that pull very strongly, but also it just generally was because of a lot of the shame around this. I just felt like, I'm this disgusting, horrible person who, like, I wouldn't want to unleash this terrible fetish, as I thought of it, on like a girl. And I occasionally thought that, like, maybe if I found somebody and settled down, I could be normal. But um, I never, I never got to the point where I felt confident that I should ask somebody out. And now I am not dating, but that's mostly like a pragmatic thing because it's like most people aren't going to want to date somebody who's like actively trying to figure out their gender issues.
Right, yeah, you kinda gotta figure that out first.
Yeah. And that was kind of that's another thing that I was thinking about in relation to Skylar earlier cuz she was talking about how when she was dating and she was like considering marrying, she realized that she had to get to the bottom of this before advancing that relationship any further. And
Yeah,
yeah,
it's, like, more respectful to the it's, like, the respectful way to deal with it. Like, you
yeah,
don't wanna spring it on someone after you're married or honestly even too far into the relationship, like, the earlier the better.
yeah. Like I'm thinking that's well, honestly, the way that things are going, that might be a first date conversation for me, but for a lot of people who have it in lesser degrees, that might be like certainly a second date or third date kind of thing. Like I don't think that people should be secret about this, especially not for like years.
Yeah, and especially not with dating women where they have a limited fertility window, and it's, like, it's really good not to squander their time.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, either way, you should probably just like shouldn't waste people's time. But like, definitely, that's another just another layer of consideration when it comes to dating women.
Yeah, um, how has your experience been, posting about I noticed you're one of the people on Twitter that posts in the sort of, like, self-aware AGP scene. Like,
Yeah.
how's your experience of posting on there?
I mean, so I'm definitely a Twitter user more than the other social medias. I find the vibe on there just kind of nicer. I mean, not nicer as in more polite. That's definitely not true, but
Right. Yeah.
nicer as in more fitting to my personality. I
Yeah,
like the
okay.
sort of the openness of discussion, and I like the fact that it allows me to sort of relate with people as individuals. Like, because when you're on Reddit, there's not a like you can go and look at people's profiles, but I feel like the site isn't really framed in that way, I guess, as
Right.
much.
Yeah. It's
Um, yeah. So my experience in the self-aware sort of AGP scene on Twitter is that most of them seem like fairly decent people. Some of them are like horny posting a little bit too much, and so I don't follow them. But the ones who don't do that, I'm mutuals with a lot of them. I've interacted quite a bit with like Kevin or with well with Skylar. I've had like multiple different like video conversations at length. And then even a few like of the non AGP sort of like vaguely I think it's kind of a contradiction in terms to say conservative trans, but they might describe themselves as conservative trans people. I've interacted a little bit in that space also, and on the whole, I find them pretty nice to interact with. They're usually just normal people. Very useful for like asking people about their experiences and just kind of data collecting.
yeah. It's and I agree with you that Twitter, you can actually interact with people more as individuals on there. There's more like you see more of each person's personality
Yeah,
than on Reddit. Um, where would you like how would you um I mean, it sounds like you don't buy into the gender ideology stuff. So I'm curious sort of like what your opinion on the trans movement is and like how you'd like to see like what sort of changes or tweaks you might like to see to that movement.
yeah. I think that the trans movement as it exists, I want very little to do with. Um, and admittedly, like I don't, I actually don't know what proportion of like trans people out there are like actually rational individuals. I haven't been around in a lot of trans scenes, and I've only sort of interacted in these sort of spaces recently, and mostly with our sort, the self aware AGP types. Um, I think that what the trans community, as I understand it, should probably do is recognize the contingent and honorary nature of their acceptance into opposite sex circles.
That was really
Like
well put. Yeah, contingent and
trans women,
honorary.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Like it is not a status that you deserve. You are not ontologically female, but if you're willing to just sort of like assimilate in a decent manner and not like act like a crazy person, um, it seems to me like things would work out just a lot better, and we wouldn't have so many of these problems that we do. Like, I mean, transsexuals up until like, I mean, there wasn't a huge cultural awareness of them, I guess, a couple decades ago, but they were always seen as like kind of weird, but maybe like pitiable individuals. Like, yeah, it would be really awful to want to be the opposite sex all the time. And yeah, we should maybe be kind to them, even if they're a little bit weird. Um, but now a lot of the thinking about transsexualism is extremely polarized. You have to either believe the sort of AGP dream narrative of, you know, you can actually become a woman in every way. The word biological woman is meaningless. It's all just an act. Um, or you have to just believe that like all transsexuals are like would be pedophiles and rapists and disgusting people who you wouldn't want to allow into any spaces, let alone opposite sex spaces.
Right, yeah, those are kind of the 2 extremes, and it, like, doesn't give it much wiggle room for people to just be, like, relaxed or neutral about
Yeah.
transsexualism.
And even a lot of the neutral space has this kind of thing going on where it's like it's, like the trans meds and the true trans versus AGP dialectic that it's just it's so exhausting because I think the a lot of the true trans types have like when it comes to the conduct and the way that trans people ought to incorporate themselves into society, I agree with them probably more than I agree with any other contingency. But they just have something fundamentally wrong in their understanding of what's going on with
Yeah. No, I agree.
transsexualism.
Yeah, the the sort of, like, policy expectations or the sort of norms that the true trans and, like, trans medicalist crowd, the sort of, like, positions they advocate for, I generally find more sympathetic and reasonable 'cause, they're not, like, very extremist in what they're demanding. Um, but they just fundamentally understand the condition wrong, and I think one of the funniest things to me is that, the people that care about being considered true trans are, like, I think most likely to be of the autosexual ideology. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
and
I'm trying to think off the top of my head of like true transfers that I've paid a lot of attention to. Like the ones that I'm thinking of are mostly like sort of in the Blair White space where it seems like that like she's actually very probably just an HSTS. Um,
yeah,
I'm trying to
I've
think.
leaned towards that for, like, just assuming she's HSTS for a long time. It's hard for me to, like, even, like, trust when someone's that type anymore just because I know the great incentives to not believe that.
Yeah, I mean my take on things like I think there's I think among the sort of self-aware AGPs or like just people who know about AGP whether they're like they themselves have it or not, there's a kind of like how there's the sort of trans spotting thing where people are trying to figure out whether or not someone is trans. There's a sort of subtype of that where everyone's trying to figure out whether or not somebody's AGP,
Yeah.
and I think some people just lean way too much into it. Like they have a complicated list of all the public AGPs versus the HSTSs. And I think in the case of like examining people online, it's really actually quite a bit more difficult to do unless they've come out and said things that are pretty explicitly AGP coded, like they get aroused by cross dressing or something.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times I think it's based on vibe, like, if you see video of how they move and talk, I think
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think people the way that people do it, like the most common straw manning is ugly trans women are AGPs, and beautiful passing ones are homosexuals.
right, yeah. It's very silly.
Yeah.
Have, I'm curious, I guess, curious what you think about the female to male transitioners, and, like, whether you pay attention to them at all. Um,
I do to some degree. I've mostly focused on MTFs because those are the most pertinent to my own situation.
yeah.
Um, I tend to take without having gotten into like the empirical literature or whatever. I tend to take Aaron Terrell's position that the majority of the FTMs seem to be ROGD of some variety, but that definitely autoandrophilia seems to exist.
Yeah. I I wish, even though like I definitely take a stance more towards thinking a lot more of it as androphilia. I do think if more people adopted that sort of stance, that at least the autoandrophilia exists, I think it would be a big step forward in terms of understanding female to male transsexualism.
Yeah.
Um,
My thoughts on it were just kind of like, yeah, I haven't done any of the research. It seems to exist because of the like interviews or whatever, and I put some I trust Aaron Terrell as an individual. He's done a lot of really good work. So
yeah, like
my
I can
thoughts
trust
on
that
it
he's
are
committed
like,
to truth.
yeah, and also like if he's experienced that, then he can sort of speak from his own experiences as well. And he's also just like interviewed so many different transsexuals and like interacted with that space in an honest way. So yeah, my thoughts on it are I can't really like, I can't experience it directly. I'm not a woman. So I can't say from that kind of level that it's real, but it's probably real. And I still lean largely towards the RGD hypothesis because of the massive incline in female to male transition
Yeah, just the
that
sheer
doesn't,
numbers.
yeah, the sheer numbers, like, and
Yeah,
it doesn't seem to, well, also with the like a lot of the female non-binaries that are really not interested in being male in any sense, um and that there doesn't seem to be as much of a corresponding spike on the male side. Like some of the statistics I've seen, admittedly I haven't like done a deep dive of research on this. I've just been kind of like, I'll just run into graphs on Twitter or whatever. So that's, take it as you will. Um, it seems like there's been a little bit of a spike in male to female transition, but like it's nothing in comparison to the female to males.
yeah, and I definitely worry about that. Just like even if the numbers are so absurd for the female to male transitions happening right now, where that's the thing that makes me sort of like, to the degree that I do believe in the ROGD explanation, it's because of the absurd numbers of female to male transitions happening now. It's insane.
Yeah.
Um,
It's another reason why I'm so very staunchly against, I guess, the ideology and the trans movement as it presently exists, just because they let ideology run way ahead of the medicine, and now we're doing these things to girls who don't know better and are probably invested into this ideology for, or invested into this identity for social political reasons rather than anything that would transition would actually help.
right. And yeah, and that concern is like part of why I decided to write a book about sort of autoheterosexuality and and in and include autoandrophilia as part of the discussion, because it was really alarming to me to see that there was so many people transitioning um, based on false pretenses in terms of like buying into gender ideology rather than like I'd be a lot less concerned if someone's transitioning and they say I'm doing this because I have autoandrophilic gender dysphoria. I would be a lot less worried about them because it seems like they actually have a realistic appraisal of their situation. Whereas if they say, I'm transitioning because, like, actually I'm a man and I just didn't know, but I figured it out recently, like, that's more worrying to me.
Yeah, definitely. And like even in the case of like people with AGP and AAP, I think reframing it on the sexuality is really helpful because the sort of ontological frame of transsexuality doesn't really allow there to be multiple options, right? Because like I guess like it kind of has been artificially. I guess queer theory might have made it so that it's more open than it could have been. But like, if you're ontologically a woman inside, right? I don't really see how you resolve that other than transitioning.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't give
Yeah,
you any like transition's the default option presented.
yeah, it's option A, and the other options of sort of like I don't even I don't know how many people resolve it into just cross dressing or whatever, but like it seems like that should be the first option and not like later down the line. Um, like full transition just seems to be kind of the default if you go for the ontological framing of things.
Yeah, and I agree that that's part of the strength of the grounding this in sexuality is that it doesn't shunt you down any particular pathway, but just merely says you have this sexuality now. Like, what do you want to do about it? And I like how open ended that is.
Yeah. And it also just like it presents options for solutions too, right? Because if there's like I don't know, if there turns out that there's some medical way to resolve autogynephilia besides sort of like indulging it and transitioning, or I should say resolve the dysphoria caused by autogynephilia. I actually I want to preserve that distinction because I think
Right.
it's
Yeah.
important. Um, but if it turns out that there's a way to resolve the dysphoria or resolve the sexual orientation, um, then that is a valid and like understandable treatment route, I guess. But if you say, for example, that I'm ontologically a woman, I'm using the word ontologically too much. I'm trying to sound book smart. If I'm saying that I'm actually a woman, and that then proposing another cure is sort of like trans erasure, or it's saying that I don't really exist as I am and that's I have to be something else for society. And so it's not only that the frame prevents people from thinking of other options, it kind of prevents other options from being acceptable to propose on some level.
Yeah. That I agree. It it kind of taboos the idea the sort of thing of proposing other options when you just when you believe in the sort of cross gender um innate like cross gender identity or whatever.
Yeah.
Um so yeah, I guess I was wondering um if there's like to any of the AGPs or AAPs out there um what you'd like want them to know it for with respect to autogynephilia or autoandrophilia. Um, like basically, are there any what thoughts have you had regarding the subject that you think would be helpful for other people for like accepting themselves and coming to terms with it?
Yeah. So what I would do is first of all say that just because you have these desires, it's not like it's obviously sort of fundamentally like maladaptive in some sense. Like this is not a normal sexuality. It's not terribly functional, but um that doesn't mean that you're a terrible person or that you're some defect, I guess. That's the sort of starting point. But I would say one that people who are self-aware about having HEP need to actually read the sexology or at least listen to interviews and podcasts by people who understand it, because I think a lot of we get a lot of people on Ask AGP who sort of show up and they're, they've like never posted in there before, and suddenly they have some fundamental new idea of what AGP is, or they have some idea of how to resolve it, or they finally fixed their AGP, and it turns out that they've read literally zero of the books, and their solution for AGP is something that they implemented like 2 weeks ago.
Right. Like they don't even
So
have the results in yet.
yeah. So I would say, first of all, okay, don't get too caught up in the shame about it. Like, okay, you have you have this sexuality. It's largely an inborn thing, but probably not 100%. But there's nothing you can really do about it at this point. Um, Engage with the actual work and the actual knowledge that we have of it, rather than just immediately resorting to sort of speculations or, I guess, purely experiential speculation. And then from that point onward, you can actually learn more about, I guess, what sorts of dysphoria or gender issues you have, to what degree you can reconcile yourself to solving it in different ways. And honestly, I don't even like. I think even the repressors, actually, I think some of them are sort of in the right insofar as if you don't have very severe AGP, if that's not like, so I mean, very few people who end up in the actual AGP spaces, uh, have it so mildly that it's kind of in the background. But I think that if you have very mild AGP, then it might even be the case that repressing it is the right option. You just need to explore what's out there, what's worked for other people. Uh, Check out the people who say that they've solved things. Make sure that that solution has had time to work itself out, like a couple
Yeah.
years at least.
Yeah, agreed.
um, and just, yeah, I would just say we need to be as rational about it as possible, um, and try to recognize, like I said, the sort of contingent and honorary nature of trans people's acceptance into opposite sex spaces, and just be serious about it, not like sort of playing these games where we're creating these new conceptions and frameworks that are untested and based on no evidence, and we're just kind of talking out of our own heads. But
Yeah.
also, like, verify empirically to see if transition would work for you. Like, try to experience, like, womanhood, I guess, insofar, try to get that cross gender experience, um, not just like solipsistically in your bedroom, but like figure out, okay, if you're going to transition, are you going to be okay? Um, Either A, trying to, well, both A, assimilating into opposite sex spaces, and B, not being accepted. If you can't handle not being accepted, then you shouldn't even try to transition.
Right. Like if you can't handle people not accepting your trans identity.
Yeah, if you yeah, if you like transition entirely on the assumption that you'll be just like any other, in my case, you'll be like any other woman, then that's something that you really need to sort of question and think about, because you have to be, I think people need to be resilient if they're going to go down this route.
Yeah. That's a good point. Uh, to like recognize the difficulties that lay down that path and accept that that will be the case instead of just just thinking you'll be accepted as a member of the other sex just flawlessly everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good advice and ways of thinking, and I think it's a good place to wrap up. um
All right.
yeah, thank you for coming on my channel.
Yeah,
And
thank you for having me. I really appreciate you and your work.
yeah, I mean, yeah, and this appreciation goes both ways. And like, I really like that people are open to the sort of ideas that I've talked about, and that they're trying to help others like us to sort of like walk into the light of truth, like the reality of our situation, and accept ourselves on a realistic basis. Um, I just I just like truth and honesty, and I appreciate that you're helping on those fronts.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I think we're very aligned in that regard.
Yeah.